All right, so why, of course, is the market and the Federal Reserve Chairman so concerned about inflation? Well, today in our inflation equation series, we look at the doomsday scenario, hyperinflation. It's happened all over the world, from Argentina to Zimbabwe most recently, and my next guest has some insight into what really happens during these scenarios. Boris Segura is an economist at Nomura Securities. He covers Latin America. He was previously a consultant to the IMF and World Banks. Welcome, Boris. It's good to have you. Let's quickly talk about Argentina and Venezuela. These are two countries very close, in close proximity, experiencing double-digit inflation, but for very different reasons. Can you give us the similarities and the differences between the two?
Well, the similarity, Lisa, is that these are the highest inflation economies in Latin America. Definitely, I wrote a piece very recently here at Nomura, and there are some differences in terms of the policy mix necessary to deal with inflation in these countries. I would say that in the case of Argentina, just pursuing more consistent macroeconomic policies, they would be able to deal with inflation. Whereas in Venezuela, the answer is more complex, because the government has taken several decisions, particularly since 2007, which have severely affected and deteriorated the productive activities of the private sector.
Boris, let's focus on Argentina for a moment, because it seems like the situation there, given some of your research, it seems like there is an opportunity for them to get this under control. But just a decade ago, they actually defaulted on their debt, and they did live through, 20 years ago, did live through hyperinflation. How is this today different from back then?
Well, there are very sensible, meaningful differences nowadays. First of all, the debt burden in Argentina is much lower than 20 years ago when they had hyperinflation, or even 30 years ago when they defaulted. Also, the external environment is very helpful to Argentina, in the sense that the prices of the main commodities that it exports are at record high levels. So the macroeconomic backdrop for Argentina is really different. The issue there, I would say, is authorities are not publishing reliable inflation data, and they are ignoring it in the end. So it's very difficult to deal with an issue that you don't want to acknowledge publicly.
So that does make it hard then to probably forecast just what the health of the economy is there. What do you think is an accurate reading of the inflation there? I've read various reports that suggest that it could be in the 25 to 35% range.
Yeah, I would say that's an accurate description. It should be around in the mid-20s. It is also important to say that it's not accelerating further, because authorities have been resourceful in terms of getting unions to stick to wage increases of around 25 to 30%. So you still have real wages growing, but not that much to put additional pressure on inflation.
All right, Boris, we have to go to break now, but when we come back, I do want to talk to you. I know you were in the country just 3 weeks ago, about how people on the ground are reacting. There has been a huge surge in a lot of consumer purchases in that country. We're going to have more on that when we return. Our guest today is Boris Segura. He is a Latin America economist for Nomura Securities. Boris, I want to talk to you. I just mentioned before we went into break there that you had been in Argentina just 3 weeks ago. And I've been reading reports. I mean, there has been a huge amount of consumption in that country. A lot of consumers, in the face of inflation, buying up real assets. What did you see when you were on the ground?
Precisely that. There is as interest rates in Argentina are negative in real terms, people are just buying up assets that can sort of work as a hedge against inflation, because they have no alternatives. Another thing that I forgot to mention earlier was that the way authorities in Argentina are trying to control inflation is via a very flat exchange rate. So that exchange rate is working as a nominal anchor in the economy right now. So pretty much people have no alternatives to invest in, so they try to buy real estate, they try to buy durable goods, they try to buy cars, anything that can hedge them against inflation.
Boris, what does that mean for the companies on the ground there? I mean, you don't think that Argentina, is in a hyperinflationary period right now. However, when companies are in that type of economy, they have no choice but to keep raising their prices as rapidly as possible. Is there that kind of panic on the ground right now on the company level?
I don't see that. I mean, actually, the economy is growing very strongly as opposed to Venezuela. So I would say the corporate sector is still investing in Argentina. Whether they can hike the prices or not, there is very strong moral suasion by the authorities. And there is one particular individual that tries to sort of authorize price increases in Argentina, and he calls people up and threatens them not to hike prices. So we are in that sort of scenario where corporates still raise prices, but not at their will.
Now, the interesting thing about all of that, when you talk about them manipulating both their inflation statistics and actually, getting on the phone and making threats to companies, at the same time, you also see that investors seem to still have a lot of confidence in this government and have a lot of confidence in Argentina's economic future. The Merval, the Argentina main stock index, up, 45% last year, slightly negative territory now. And you don't think that they're going to go into a real hyperinflationary period. So how do you balance those two sort of opposing perspectives?
I mean, again, we are in sort of I would call a high inflation scenario, but to get to hyperinflation, it's going to be extremely difficult to foresee that scenario pretty much all over the region. As you mentioned at the beginning of the program, last hyperinflationary episode was Zimbabwe, but that's a disaster in terms of economic policy. So things would have to get really bad in Argentina for us to see hyperinflation. And Venezuela, to be fair, Venezuela has never experienced hyperinflation. The worst in terms of inflation in Venezuela has been seen after banking crisis in the 80s and later in the 90s, but inflation never really went up above 120% a year. That's very far away from what we define as hyperinflations, which are monthly inflation rates of 40 to 50%.
All right, Boris, we have to leave it there. Interesting look at two countries that are very different from our own, but ones that certainly are countries that many investors here look at. Thank you so much, Boris Segura, Latin America economist at Nomura Securities, joining us today with a look at a hyperinflationary scenario.